What is the most important verse in the Torah? The question itself appears to be unusual and unnecessary, because every single verse and word and letter in the Torah was given to us by God at Mount Sinai. Therefore, every single part of the Torah must be equally sacred. You might say, well, there is the legal part of the Torah, the formal presentation of laws. And then there's the narrative. And surely, the story part of it can't be as important as the legal part is. But the Talmud tells us as follows: Gadol sichatam shel avdei avot mitoratam shel banim. The everyday conversation of the servants of the patriarchs is as important for us as the legal texts of their descendants. And this is based on Genesis chapter 24. It's one of the longest chapters of the entire Bible, 67 verses. The entire chapter is a story. It's a story about a shidduch, matchmaking. Eliezer is sent by Abraham to Mesopotamia to find a prospective wife for his son Isaac. And we're told all the intricate details, what Eliezer thought, what he did, how he planned his mission, how it actually came into effect. This entire process in his mind and through all his comments. And yet when we find that the Torah comes in later texts to give us the laws, it's very precise. Precise to the extent that we learn from every single word, every nuance. In fact, there's even a concept in the Gemara Masechet Nedarim of the spaces between letters. That is to say, the spirit of the text, which can present certain laws and instructions to us. The narrative is very important because we must learn from people's experiences. And indeed, you can have formal instruction, and then informally, you can gain so much through what we go through in life. And in the same way as we can learn so much from our personal experiences and the experiences of others, in addition to what we read in books and what we're instructed to do in a formal way, so too in the Torah, 95% of the content is narrative. From the stories, we learn how to be decent and responsible people. So therefore, how can anybody say that any one part of the Torah is more important than any other? I wouldn't pose the question if our sages hadn't posed it. And in fact, there are two central texts, one in Ein Yaakov and the other in the Talmud Yerushalmi Masechet Nedarim, where this very question is posed. What is the most important verse in the entire Torah? In Ein Yaakov, 3 answers are given. In the Yerushalmi Nedarim, 2 answers are given. So let's go through the 5 answers. First of all, in Ein Yaakov. Ein Yaakov is a homiletic anthology of thoughts presented to us primarily culled from Talmudic texts. And the first answer given to our question, what is the most important verse in the Torah, is Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. This is the answer of Ben Zomer. Over to you, ladies and gentlemen. Can anybody tell me, please? Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. What is? Do I have any takers? It's not Ani Hashem Elokeichem, but good try. Yeah, what? Fantastic! Congratulations. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Listen, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And I think we would have expected that answer. It certainly should be in a short list of 5, if not the top response to our question. Because this is the essence of our faith, our belief in one single God. And notice, Shema, listen. It's not ha'azin, to hear, rather it's shema, to listen, and there's a significant difference between the two. Both terms are often used in the Torah. Laha'azin, to hear, means that what is transmitted to you is recorded. It's very much like the word hear in English, which comes from ear. it goes into the ear. Lahazin comes from ozen, which also means ear. It goes into the ear. The trouble is it can go into this ear and then out of the other ear. However, shomea, lishmoa, shema, listen attentively, to take note, to internalize what is being conveyed in order that it can have a long-lasting impact. That is why when we pray to Almighty God to have mercy upon us, we say, Shma koleinu Hashem Elokeinu, chuz v'rachem aleinu. Listen, O Lord our God, to our prayers. Have mercy upon us. We don't say to God, ha'azin, please hear what we're saying. We want him to record it properly, to take note of the seriousness of our plea. And so too when God appeals to us to believe intensely and in a deep-rooted fashion in the unity of his name, it is Shema Yisrael. We need to listen, and we need to make this information a very essential part of our lives. Sometimes we might wonder, does it make sense? What God does, how he rules this world, where we say he should be merciful, but then on the other hand, so many things, and we wonder, is it possible that a benevolent Lord can actually bring this about? The famous medieval Spanish scholar, Abraham ibn Ezra, writes in his commentary on the book of Deuteronomy, on the verse, Hatzur tamim paulo kichol terachav mishpat, in the parish of Ha'azinu, which means, the rock, his ways are perfect. And this, interestingly, is the verse with which we commence a funeral service, through which we acknowledge Hatzur tamim paulo kichol terachav mishpat, God's ways are perfect, and all his paths are just. And Ibn Ezra writes that he came to an understanding of the depth of this message through an incident that transpired in his Beit Din, where he was a judge in a court of law. And what was that incident? Two friends were on a journey together, and they had various provisions with them, and it was coming to the conclusion of their journey, and a third party came across them out in the middle of nowhere, a man who was absolutely starving. And he said that he hadn't eaten for some while. He was desperate to have some food. Did they have any food to give him? And it so happened that the two men had some small loaves of bread. Let's call them A and B. A had 3 loaves of bread left. B had 2 loaves of bread left. So what happened was, they said with pleasure to this man called C, come and join us. So each one of them had a third of the bread. At the end of the meal, C was so appreciative, he said to A and B, you know, you've saved my life. Dipped his hand into his pocket and he took out 5 gold coins. And he gave it to the 2 of them, and off he went. Now the 2 of them had been friends. However, they started to argue, and once they actually fell apart in terms of their relationship. They came before Avraham ibn Ezra for a din Torah in his court of law. A said as follows, I should take 3 of the coins. B should get 2. After all, I had 3 loaves of bread and he had 2. B, however, said, that man, he didn't say, because you had 3, I'm giving you 3, and because you had 2, I'm giving you 2. He just gave the 5 to the 2 of us. Therefore, we should each take 2.5. 2 each, and let's buy something with the third and then share what it is. Let's share it equally. This was their dispute, and they were coming to Ephraim ibn Ezra in order to resolve it. And I wonder what response you would give, having considered this matter. Having heard the arguments of the 2 sides, Rabbi Ephraim ibn Ezra declared, this is my judgment. A, you will take 4 of the coins, and B, you will take 1. Both A and B jumped up and they said, that's impossible. You must be an imposter. Who says that you even know the law? This is ridiculous. And they started to storm out of the court. Ibn Ezra stopped them and he said, come back. I want to show you what I mean. And then he explained it to them. He said, this is the rationale of my judgment. He said, altogether there were 5 loaves, 3 and 2. So let's divide these loaves up into thirds, Consequently, there were altogether 15 thirds. A, you owned 9/15, 9 of those thirds, and B, you owned 6/15, 6 of those thirds. Now, the three of you, A, B, and C, sat down to eat. So, A, you had your part, which was 5 of the thirds. B had your part. You had your part, which is 5 of the thirds. What did you give to C? A, you gave 4/3 to him, and B, you gave 1/3, because you had 9 altogether and you had 6. As a result, therefore, you gave 4/3, you gave 1/15. I hope you're following this. When A and B heard this, they said, "This is amazing. You're right. It makes so much sense." And they readily accepted his judgment. So Avram ibn Ezra, in his commentary on Deuteronomy, he says, sometimes you can have a judgment that is laid down by a court of flesh and blood, and it doesn't make any sense to us, yet they know. How much more so when it comes to the judgment of the Holy One, blessed be He. Sometimes it just seems irrational, it doesn't make any sense, it might seem to be unfair, but God knows what He is doing. As it says in the Gemara Masech Brachot, Kol mata avid kutshabrichu letav avid. Whatever God does, He does for the good. And indeed, sometimes we might despair because we just can't fathom why God might do certain things. But we do have implicit and deep-rooted faith in Him because His judgment is true. And that is why we bless God on happy occasions, and we also bless Him on sad occasions. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. We know the fact that the Lord our God is the Lord who is one, and where appropriate we declare Baruch Dayan Haemet, blessed is the true judge. Now, in the Shema, the very next statement relates to the love of God. And accepting the truth of God should then be translated into a relationship that we're called upon to have with Him. And we all know the words by heart. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Now, is it fair that we should be given such a commandment? You might say, well, of course, why not? Well, let me tell you why it might be. You see, our Torah is a fair Torah. The Torah only commands us to do something which we have it within our power to deliver. Sometimes it might be quite difficult. However, it cannot be davar she'ein hatzibur yecholim la'amod bo, in the terminology of the Talmud. No law is given to us where it is beyond the capacity of most people to perform it. When it comes to love, I don't have a love button. I can't press that button to say, I now feel affectionate towards something or someone. Love is a consequence of knowledge and of experience. And if I don't feel affection, then I just don't feel it. I can't force myself to have certain feelings. Therefore, how can God command us, ve'ahavta, you must love me? And not only to love God, but with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our might. As a result, Maimonides, in his Sefer HaMitzvot, which deals with all 613 commandments, he explains as follows, and he must have been wondering about our very question. Says the Rambam, the term va'ahavta is in the hif'il, the causative, meaning not that you must love God, but rather you must cause God to be loved. Va'ahavta, says the Rambam, means ahavehu al habriot, cause God to be loved by others. And the essential meaning here is, as a Jewish person, you are an ambassador of your faith. Wherever you go in the world, people will be judging the entire Jewish nation through your actions, through your sayings, through your deeds. The God of Israel will be put on trial based on how you conduct your affairs in the world. And this is such a pertinent message for us all. Because indeed, how true it is. You have certain places where people might know just one Jewish person, one Jewish family. And their view of Yiddishkeit, of our Torah, of our value system, based on the impression that is given by the Jewish people might know. And therefore, this is such an important message for us. Always to remember, we represent our history, we represent our values, we represent our people in everything that we do. And we should not cause a chilul Hashem to let the Almighty down and to let our people down through that which we do. I find that sometimes our connection with God can primarily come at times of distress and sorrow, through darkness of experiences, rather than through the light of joy. And I believe that it is so important for us to recognize that in the Psalms we are taught, Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, serve the Lord with joy. And in fact, our primary connection with our Creator comes about through happiness. To the extent that the Talmud tells us, prophecy only came to people, mitoch simcha shel mitzvah, through happiness and joy. If a person felt depressed, that prophet could not prophesy. And that is the reason why for 22 years, God did not speak to Jacob, our patriarch. These were the 22 years of the absence of Joseph. Because Jacob had no closure in his life, he was continuously wondering what had happened to his son. He was living a depressed existence. As a result, he could not connect to God as he might usually be capable of doing. Full connection with the Almighty comes through happiness and joy. And it is in this connection that I want to pose the following question to you. It's the order of our services. You know, the word Seder means order. That's why on Pesach, when we sit down to a Seder, we follow a certain order. In fact, our Seder starts by singing or chanting the Seder, the order of the Seder. Now, the book that we use to pray with is called Siddur. Siddur is the same term from Seder. Every Siddur is in the same order. And that's why it's so wonderful. Wherever you are in the world, you pop into a shul, and you can find your way in the Siddur. It's the same standard order. Now, what is the order in the Siddur? Surely we've got it wrong. Shachrit, then Mincha, then Ma'ariv. The morning service, the afternoon service, and then the evening service. But our day starts in the evening. It should be Ma'ariv, Shachrit, and then Mincha, the evening service, the morning service, and then the afternoon service. That's why our Sabbaths start in the evening, and our Yom Tov start in the evening. And our Hebrew birthdays start in the evening, and Yortzeit start in the evening. Our day to sunset. So why, therefore, does the Siddur start with Shachrit, which is the morning prayer? And the answer comes from a verse in the Psalms, Lahagid baboker chasdecha ve'emunatecha balelot. We should recite all about the merciful nature of God in the morning, and we should connect to the faithfulness of God at night. Here we recognize that night is a time of fear. At night time we feel somewhat fragile. It's a period of concern for us. That's human nature. Whereas when we wake up in the morning, we have a positive mind. We're approaching a fresh sun is shining upon us. And therefore, from this verse, we learn that in the morning time, we should be full of gratitude and praise giving to God. Thank you for the opportunities, Almighty, that you've given me. At nighttime, we're worried. And we pour out to the Almighty with concern. So which should come before which? Connecting to God through sorrow or connecting to God through thanksgiving? It's the thanksgiving that comes first. First in the mornings, we open our hearts to God saying, thank you for giving us all these great opportunities. And at nighttime, we come to Him in a time of fear and sorrow. And as a result, during our synagogue services, I don't know if you've realized this, we stand up for all our Thanksgiving prayers. Of course, we stand up when the Ark is open. We stand up for the Amidah, which means standing. But in addition, all the other prayers for which we stand are Thanksgiving prayers. Psalm 100, Mizmor LeTodah in the morning. We stand for that. Vayavarech David in the morning. We stand for that because we say within it, Modim anachnu lach, we give thanks to you, O Lord. If you're sitting down for the repetition of the Amidah, when it comes to Modim, you stand up. Hallel, we stand up, and so on. Because it's thanksgiving, it's praise, it's happiness, it's joy, which comes right at the heart of the connection we have with the Almighty. And that, you know, in Jewish tradition of a shliach, a representative. So I can appoint a representative to carry out something on my behalf. The Talmud, a yada arichta, an extended arm of my own arm, with one exception. You cannot have a representative to say thank you. You must express gratitude yourself. If you want to say thank you to somebody, don't ask somebody else, please will you call so-and-so and thank them. Pick up the phone yourself. And that is why in the Hallel we say, Odecha ki anitani. I give thanks to you, O Lord, because you've answered my prayers. It's always in the singular. Nagila v'nismechavo, we will be happy, we will rejoice. That's in the plural, but Odecha is myself. And that is why the Chazan repeats the Amidah on behalf of the community to include those who haven't been capable of reciting the Amidah adequately themselves. But when it comes to one of our blessings, everybody has to stand up and say it for themselves. And that's Modin. Because when it comes to thanks, you do it for yourself. So central is it to our experiences when we encounter the Almighty. So as a result, from the order of our services in the Siddur, we recognize how important it is to be joyous and to celebrate our connection with God. And of course we come to Him in times of sorrow and in times of trouble. But really, we should be coming to Shul to celebrate simchas in addition to coming in times of trials and tribulations. And that is why in temple times there was the concept of the Korban Todah, the thanksgiving offering. The offering which people would bring to give gratitude to the Almighty. And there is a fascinating detail here. You know that in ancient times in Israel, there was a law. On signposts, you could put direction to any place except for Jerusalem. You would never find a signpost indicating this way to Jerusalem. Isn't that strange? To all other places, signposts, but no signposts to Jerusalem. What's the background to it? Our sages said as follows. When people are going to Jerusalem to offer the Korban Todah, to give a thanksgiving offering, they should knock on people's doors to say, excuse me, which way to Jerusalem? And then the person will say, oh, you're going to Jerusalem, what are you going for? Oh, something incredible has happened in my life, I'm going to thank God. They'll say, oh, wow, isn't that amazing? And then they would show them which way to go. The whole idea, therefore, would be to engage people in conversation so that people would share their good news. We're living in a world in which what makes the headlines? It's all the bad news, it's the troubling, dangerous news. Regular, ordinary news doesn't make the headlines. But in our tradition, we need to share good news. And we need to be filled with gratitude for what the Almighty does for us. And therefore, right at the heart of our Shema Yisrael, of our connection with our Creator, we need to have the happiness and the joy of all the blessings that He bestows upon us. So that's our first answer to our question, what's the most important verse in the Torah? The second answer in the Ein Yaakov is Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. What's that verse, please? Fantastic. Really well. Okay. Love your neighbor as yourself. Leviticus 19, 18. And you know, of course, in the Gemara, Masechet Shabbat, Daf Lamed Amud Bet, page 30b, the story is told of a potential convert who came to Shammai the elder and said, please, can you teach me the whole Torah while I stand on one foot? And Shammai got angry with him. He thought that he was ridiculing our tradition. The same man then came to Hillel the Great and said to Hillel, can you teach me the whole Torah while I stand on one foot? And Hillel said, sure I can. What is it? Don't do unto others that which is hateful to you. This is the entire Torah. The rest is all commentary. So Hillel here was agreeing with Ben Nanas, who was the sage in the Ein Yaakov, who said, love your neighbor as yourself is the most important verse. And you know, there are some who unfairly criticize our tradition. They say that Hillel's teaching is the negative. Don't do unto others that which you don't want them to do to you. Hillel put it in the negative form because the Torah text is in the positive form. Love your neighbor as yourself. To counterbalance it, to show both positively and negatively, we should always empathize with other people. And the Gemara in Masechet Ketubot gives us a rule with regard to weddings. The question there is asked, Ketzad meraktin lifnei hakala. How do you dance before a bride? Which essentially means, what do you say to a bride on her wedding day? And there's a difference of view. Hillel said, Kala na'ava chasuda. To every bride you should say, you're looking beautiful and you're such a lovely person. Shammai said, Kala kamot shehi. Tell it the way it is. And Tosfot in their commentary say, obviously, if there's something negative, just keep shtum, right? And if there's something positive, then offer those words of praise. So the Gemara goes on to say that the students of Shammai said to the students of Hillel, does it not say in the Torah, Midvar sheket tirchak, distance yourselves from falsehood? What happens if there is a bride who is not so appealing, who's not the best person in the world? How can you tell a lie? And Hillel answered and he said, it's all very subjective. We're not dealing here with absolutes. In the eyes of her groom, she's beautiful, wonderful. And we need to empathize with people. That's the source of this teaching from the Gemara. A person should always empathize with other people. What is it that they don't want to happen now? I shouldn't bring it upon them. What is it that they want most of all? Let's see if I can produce it for them. All, of course, if it is within the law and if it is appropriate. But continuously, we fulfill the most important verse of the Torah according to this tradition, placing ourselves in the shoes of others. A story which is told of a couple who settled in what was then Palestine at the beginning of the last century. They found it very difficult to make ends meet. In fact, they had a growing family, a lot of children, difficult to produce bread on the table every day. So the couple decided that the father of the household would travel to America. He had some connections there. He would stay there for a while, make as much money as he could. He would send money periodically back to Palestine, and then eventually he would come back. He went to New York. It went absolutely brilliantly there. And after 6 months, he had already saved $100. Quite a substantial days, and he was ready to send it. He would carry on working. So he let people know. He wanted somebody who would be sailing to Israel to take the money for him. One person who was sailing thought, I've got an opportunity here. So he went over to this fellow. He said, I'm going to be sailing to Israel in 2 weeks' time. I'm willing to take the money for you, but can you just tell me, please, what reward you will give me for doing this favor? So the man said, all right, I'll give you the $100, and you give my family what you want. The man said, really? He said, yeah, give them what you want. Sounded a bit too good to be true. He brought in a lawyer, wrote up a document, signed by the two of them. 2 weeks later, he presented himself, came to the man's house. He said, okay, I'm on my way now to the port. Can you give me the money? And the man said, yes, okay. And this is the $100. So have you decided what you're going to do with it? He said, yes. He said, I'm going to $5 and I'm giving $5 to your wife and family. The man said, that's really good of you. I'll let my wife know that she should expect. The man said, no. You told me I could take what I want. So $95 coming to me, 5 to family. The man said, no, 95 to my wife. So the fellow says, how can you justify that? He took the contract out of his pocket. So the man said as follows, you agreed that you would give my wife and family what you want. Now you want $95. Therefore give my family what you want. And this was the message of Hillel. Give others what you want. If you want happiness, make other people's lives happy. If you want understanding, if you want joy, if you want to get places in this world, try your best to do things for others. And where possible, volunteer your services, your money, your time, and your talents for the sake of other people. There is one passage in the Torah which for me is powerful when it comes to the teaching of reaching out to others, loving them as yourself. It's in Parshat Mishpatim in the book of Exodus. Exodus chapter 24, verses 6 to 8. And there we have details of the very first sacrifice that was offered. Before the Kohanim were present, Moses himself offered that first sacrifice on the altar. And various instructions were given to him by God. Vayikach chatzi hadam vayasem ba'ganot v'chatzi hadam zarak al hamizbech. God said to Moses, half the blood from the animal that has been slaughtered, place it in pans, and the other half of the blood, pour it on the altar. And that's exactly what Moses did. Vayikach sefer habrit vayikra boznei ha'am vayomeru kol asher diber Hashem na'aseh v'nishma. Then he took the book of the covenant in the presence of the people, and they declared all that the Lord says, we will do and we will understand. And then we're told, Vayikach et adam vayizrok el ha'am. Moses then took the other half of the blood and he threw it to the people. So essentially, there was a considerable amount of blood from the animal. So far, I'm sure you're wondering, what is this all about and how's it connected to our lesson you'll see in a moment. So, he took the blood, half of it he poured on the altar, and half he threw towards the people. Rashi asks a question. Rashi says, Mi chetzio. Who split it in half for Moses? God said to Moses, take half, put it on the altar, half towards the people. Mi chetzio. Who helped Moses to get it absolutely right, 50-50? The answer is Malach ba. An angel was sent from heaven, and that angel divided equally into two. My question is, why do we have to ask the question in the first place? The term chatzi doesn't literally mean half. It means a portion of. Chatzi Hallel, half Hallel, it's not half of Hallel. Chatzi Kaddish, half of Kaddish, it's not half of Kaddish. It means a portion of. Lachatzot et hakvish, in modern Hebrew, means to halve the road. It basically means to cross the road, because you've got this side and this side, this side, that. Doesn't mean you have to get it absolutely right. At the Seder table, we're told that the person who is heading the proceedings takes the middle matzah and he breaks it in half. Who has ever got it absolutely right? What it means is two portions. So if we have a fixation, it has to be 50-50. So why are we asking the question? And then the answer. An angel was sent from heaven to split it in half. You know, if God is going to send angels from heaven to perform miracles, I can think of some amazing miracles they can perform for us. But just to avoid it being 51-49, what difference does it make? So the Pachad Yitzchak gives a beautiful commentary, and he says as follows. The pouring of the blood over the altar is a symbol of our connection with God. The throwing of the blood towards the people is a symbol of our connection with our fellow human beings. There are some people who might claim, our ben adam lamakom, our relationship with God, that is what counts most of all, and not so much how well we get on with people. There are others who say, no, it's the humanistic side of our experience that is most important. That's the ikar. That's the prime purpose of life. And a relationship with God is not so important. So what happened? God sent an angel from heaven to divide it, to show that they're absolutely equally important. Let no person come along and say, davening to God, lighting candles, keeping Yom Tov, eating matzvah, fasting on Yom Kippur, that's what's important in life. But if I shmuchel a bit in business, and if I don't treat people so well, it doesn't really matter. They're of equal importance. Chatzi, 50-50. That's why God sent that angel. And let no person otherwise come along and say, being a good mensch, that's what counts most of all. Who cares about our responsibility to God? No, it's all of crucial importance. And I would go one step further to say, it's not really two different compartments of our faith. Actually, they're both an integral part of our connection with God. And that is why on the Ten Commandments, We have on the right-hand side the commandments between ourselves and God. On the left-hand side, the commandments between ourselves and our fellow human beings. And the commandment to honor parents is at the bottom on the right-hand side. Because through honoring parents, you're honoring God. Connecting the two together. When I'm responsible to my fellows, I'm responsible to my Creator. And if I let other people down, I'm letting my God down. And that is why the Gemara in Masechet Avodah Zarah, Daf Zayin Amud Bet, tells us, Kol mi sheyesh lo yirat shamayim ve'ein bo gemilut chasadim kemi she'ein lo eloka, which means any person who fears God but who does not engage in acts of loving kindness towards others is like a person who has no God, because what kind of God does that person believe in? Not a God of benevolence, not a God who cares. That's not what you call really being frum. Really being religious means being connected to God and being a decent mensch. If somebody would ask me, who's my Rebbe? Which rabbi is the rabbi that I look to? And you know, it's always important that we should all have rabbis. That's why in the Ethics of the Fathers we're taught, Asei lecha rav. Have a rabbi for yourself, have a role model. And whoever you are, every person should have that rabbi. Because we are all continuously students. You know, one of the greatest compliments you can give to a learned person is say, oh, what a Talmid Chochem he is. Isn't that an amazing compliment? He's a Talmid Chochem. He's a wise student. The greatest and most outstanding rabbi in the world is a student. Because whoever we are, we continuously learn. So who's my rabbi? He lived from 1810 to 1883. But I feel as if I've known him for so long. I've studied his works, and in particular, the anecdotes of his life. His name was Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. And he was the founder of what was called the Mussar movement. He easily could have been the head of a yeshiva, an outstanding Talmudic sage, which he was. He devoted his life exclusively to that. But he noticed that while people in Europe in the 19th century were exceptionally learned, there was something absent when it came to Menschlichkeit. And so he established the Mussar movement, through which he had Mussarstiebels. Mussar is material through which we learn about our ethical responsibilities to others. And he popularized it. And there were 500 centers of this kind throughout Europe, where people would come and spend a half an hour or an hour a day studying the ethical dimension of our responsibilities to God. So I'm telling you all this because of one anecdote. And in fact, in my installation address, just over a year ago in St. John's Wood Synagogue, I told this story because I think it says so much about real Judaism. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter in the 1840s was the rabbi of Vilna. And there was a matzah manufacturer who desperately wanted Rabbi Yisrael's hechsher, his stamp of approval on his boxes of matzahs. He had already some hechsherim from other rabbis, but if you could get Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's name to say this matzah is kosher, oh, it would be amazing for his sales. So he invited Rabbi Yisrael to come over to his matzah factory. And it was in November, December, at a time when the matzah process was getting going for the following Pesach. He was given a tour of inspection, taken to this part and that part and the other part, and at the end of the tour of the premises, the owner brought Rabbi Yisrael Salanter into his office and he said, so, you're going to give your hechsher? Rabbi Yisrael said, no. He said, what are you talking about? Every single stringency in the book is applied here in my factory. Rabbi Yisrael said, I'm not going to. He said, well, can you explain? He said, yes. While I was going through your premises, I was speaking to some of the women that you employ. They were telling me about their long hours, their low pay, the verbal abuse that they suffer at the hands of some of the heads of department. As far as I'm concerned, your matzah is not kosher. And I think that's such an important message for us. Because when it comes to kashrus, what is right, what is appropriate, you know, kosher means fit. What is fit for us in life? It's that message of chatzi chatzi. Yes, we have a responsibility to God, and we also have a responsibility to our fellow human beings. And they have to go hand in hand. And that is why Ben Nanasin and Yaakov said, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, is the most important verse of the Torah. Love your neighbor as yourself. Answer number 3. Okay. Answer number 3 is given by Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi. If anybody knows this verse, you'll be the greatest Talmud Chacham. Okay. Exodus chapter 29, verse 39. What is it? Is there a hand somewhere? Okay. Right. So I'll tell you what it is. In Exodus chapter 29, verse 39, we're given the laws of the Tamid, of the daily ongoing offering, which was offered every morning and every afternoon. And this is how the verse goes. You shall offer 1 lamb every morning and 1 lamb every afternoon. According to Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, this is the most important verse of the entire Torah. What sense can you make of it? And I will give you 2 great answers. The first is that there is another verse in the Torah which is identical except for the absence of 1 letter. We read it on Rosh Chodesh from the portion of Pinchas in the book of Numbers. There it is, et hakeves echad taseva boker. Here it is, et hakeves ha-echad. You see, in Exodus 29:39, we're told about the very first time that a lamb was to be offered. And you shall sacrifice the lamb in the morning and the afternoon on that very first day. Subsequently, we're told about you shall sacrifice a lamb every morning. So here we're being told about the commencement of a process, how to start something correctly, how to get something off on the right foot. So much depends on appropriate beginnings, and therefore never overlook the power of starting things correctly. I apply this to bar mitzvahs. You know, the system we have in so many of our shuls, that a boy for a year to a year and a half will practice, will train, will study to get his maftir, his haftorah right, sometimes the sedra as well. And then he'll stand on the bimah for anything between 10 minutes and 3/4 of an hour. In sporting terms, it's a very long run-up for a very short jump. And yet we do it. Why do we celebrate bar mitzvahs in this way? Why for bat mitzvahs is there so much preparation, a whole course of instruction, preparing the Dvar Torah, and whatever else a girl might be doing? Little slot on her day. It's because we appreciate the value of starting correctly. At the very first moment when you're a Jewish adult, start off on the right foot. Get going appropriately and responsibly. And that's what this verse tells us. And then there's a second response. And this is the answer of the Maharal of Prague. He said that this verse is all about continuous devotion. It's about the Tamid offering, to be offered every single day, morning and afternoon, non-stop. And that's why we have, in memory of the temple, our daily services to this day. And the message here is as follows. Seasonal devotion, occasional interest, that's nice and it's good and we welcome it. But if we want to keep our faith going, we have to have ongoing, absolute, daily commitment. The people who keep shuls going are not the ones who pop in once or twice or 3 times a year. It's brilliant to see them. But the people who keep our communities going are the ones who are there every day, the ones who are there every week. And when it comes to maintaining our faith and our connection with our roots, it needs to be ongoing commitment to keep that flame of Judaism alive within our hearts. And that's why Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi says this verse is the most significant in the Torah. Answer number 4. We now move to the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, Tractate Nedarim. And there are 2 answers that are given. The first we've actually already had. Here it's in the name of Rabbi Akiva, Leviticus 19, verse 18, love your neighbor as yourself. And then we have a response to Rabbi Akiva. Ben Azai says to Rabbi Akiva, you are wrong. Love your neighbor as yourself is not the most important verse. Genesis chapter 5, verse 1 is more important than it. Who can tell us, please? Amazing! Congratulations! Genesis chapter 5, verse 1 is worded as follows. Zeh sefer toldot Adam, b'yom baro Elokim Adam, b'tselem Elokim asa oto. This is the book of the generations of man. On the day on which God created man, in the image of God, he formed him. So why is this verse better than love your neighbor as yourself? Ben Azai was saying to Rabbi Akiva, V'avta l'reacha, loves your neighbor, means love the person who lives next to you, or love the person who's part of your community. Love reacha b'mitzvot, love your fellow Jew. Love the person who is part of your social clique. But we learn from the book of Genesis that every single human being is created in the image of God. And therefore, our love, our affection, and our consideration should extend to absolutely one and all, because every single person counts. And it is from this teaching that we derive the concept of tikkun olam. As we say in the Aleinu prayer, Letaken olam b'malchut shakai, we have a responsibility to heal this world, to reach out to everybody in this world. As Jewish people, of course, we have responsibilities towards what we call unzera, to our own. But at the same time, we can only truly live the type of Jewish lives that God wants us to if we embrace all of humanity and reach out to one and all, because absolutely everybody counts. And you know, we have a custom. It's not a law, it's a custom. Some people are quite strict about it, and that is, we never count. Even if you're waiting for a minyan, you want to know how many are there. The words, Hoshea et Hamech, it's a verse with 10 words. There are 10 men there. There are some people who count not 1, not 2, not 3. So that they're not really counting. It's a bit ridiculous. But why don't we count? I'll tell you why. You see, it's so important for us to connect to other people as people. If you reduce a person to become a mere number, then you won't anymore relate to that person as a mensch, as a human being. The Nazis, Yimach Shmam, understood this very well. And that is why in Auschwitz they branded numbers on our arms. Because once in their minds they had reduced us to become mere digits, it meant that they didn't have to relate to us as human beings. We were just like cattle. And them, tragically, to do with us whatever they wanted to. You know, one of my favorite melodies comes from Les Mis, where Jean sings the song, Who Am I? Jean Valjean's answer, Who am I? His answer is 24601. He cannot liberate himself from that prison identity that he had, where he was a mere number, and as a result, he cannot reach his personal potential. We recognize the divinity within every soul, the Tselem Elokim, God's presence within every single human being. And that's why, according to our tradition, we don't count people, because we don't reduce people to become mere numbers. Every single person counts. And as a result, we need to reach out to one and all with love, with affection, and as Ben Azai teaches us, to recognize that as Jewish people, we can only fulfill the divine expectations of us who are here for all of society, which leaves me time for my concluding answer. And the concluding answer is not actually a verse. It comes from the Mishnah. And the Mishnah in Masechet Peah, in the very first Mishnah, which we recite every morning in Shul, tells us that there are some amazing mitzvot, some wonderful precepts that we can perform. And there's a list of such daily precepts. And then the Mishnah concludes by telling us, V'talmud Torah keneged kulam. The study of Torah amounts to all of them combined. Talmud Torah keneged kulam. It's a bit difficult to translate this. Some might say, if you study Torah, it's attributed to you as if you have performed all the commandments. But in actual fact, what we're being told here is that the study of Torah is a commandment in its own right, but it's also the greatest enabler, because it facilitates the performance of all of the mitzvot. Once you study Torah, then you know what is written in the handbook. You know what the guide says. And as a result, you have the key to perform all the tenets of the Torah. And that is why, for us, learning, education, is so crucially important. There is a verse in Proverbs, Ki ner mitzvah v'Torah or. A mitzvah, a precept, is like candlelight, and the study of Torah is like daylight. And the Gemara in Masechet Sotah, on Daf Kaf Aleph Amud Aleph, there the Talmud tells us what is meant by this verse. If you carry out a mitzvah, it's like candlelight. If you study Torah, it's like daylight. You see, says the Gemara, when you're performing the mitzvah, you're engaged in that particular precept. You won't be doing anything wrong at the time. You'll be inspired. Your life will be illuminated. It's like candlelight. For as long as the candle is burning, the light is there. Once the candle is over, the light goes. So too with a mitzvah. You could be engaged in an incredible mitzvah, and then afterwards you can go outside, be tempted to do whatever it is, and be engaged in whatever it might be. While you're engaged with a mitzvah, your life is inspired and illuminated. When, however, it comes to the study of Torah, Torah is or. Torah is daylight. The light of the sun is never dimmed. It might become dark for us, but the sun is shining elsewhere. And the message for us is that when I study Torah, that information, that education becomes internalized by me. It will fashion my ways. It will guide my policies. It will have a deep-rooted effect on everything that I do for the rest of my life. And therefore, that Torah knowledge will continue always to be with me, to inspire and guide me. And that is why in our tradition, education is so crucially important. And this fifth answer to the question of what is the most important verse of the Torah highlights for us what I believe to be the greatest key to Jewish survival, which is Jewish education. And by Jewish education, we don't just mean formal schools for children. Yes, that of course is included and is crucially important for us to have. Jewish schools as faith schools. But in addition, we need informal education through social centers and cultural centers for children, for youth, and for adults. And yes, we need limud conferences, events through which we can come together in order to study our faith and to deepen our connection with our Jewish roots. And with this in mind, I want to conclude by sharing an anecdote with you. It's from the time when I was Chief Rabbi of Ireland. And one day I got a call from the office of the Taoiseach, that's the Prime Minister's office, and I was informed that two leading American congressmen happened to be in town on that day. Was I interested in meeting them? So I asked, why am I being invited? They said, oh, both of them happen to be Jewish. And we thought you might want to interest them. They're on a tour of European centers. They're in Dublin today. Sounded very interesting. I went over, and I had a lovely hour with the two congressmen. Now, they told me that on the previous day they had been in Munich. And being a Sunday, and being on an important diplomatic mission, they decided to do the politically correct thing. And what was that on the Sunday? To go to church. So they inquired about the most prominent church in the city. They were directed to a Lutheran church. They made it known that they would be attending when they arrived. The heads of the church were on the steps to greet them. They were brought inside. And they were brought all the way to the front. They were seated second row from the front. And the church was filling up. The service was just about to commence. And one of them started to panic. He says, you know something? We're right here at the front. Just about everybody's behind us. They can see us. And in the row in front, in that pew, there was just one solitary figure, one man. So the other fellow said, I've got an idea. We don't have to turn around at all. There's that fellow. Let's do what he does. And it should be all right. So that's exactly what happened. They didn't understand a word of German, couldn't know what the service was about. When he stood up, they stood up. When he sat down, they sat down. Worked beautifully. And then just before the end of the service, he stood up, they stood up, and the entire church burst out in uncontrollable laughter. At the end of the service, the pastor came over, introduced himself. He said, I hope you don't mind if I explain to you what happened at that point. You see, he said, that part of the service was the announcements. And he said, I announced to the congregation that a baby boy had been born, and then I said, will the father please stand? So then one of the congressmen said to me, he said that he had learned a very valuable political lesson from that experience, and that is, you should always know the facts before you make a stand. And that, I think, is a lesson we should all remember. We want our children and our grandchildren and all subsequent generations to make a Jewish stand. Therefore, we need to give them the facts. And that's why we have to invest in the best possible Jewish education for the sake of our future. And that's why our fifth answer to the question is, the most important element of our Torah is chinuch, Jewish education. And you know the term Chanukah, dedication, is the same term as chinuch, which is education. You can only have dedication if there is education. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Yeah.